Dinosaurs, they're huge, they're scary, they're dead, and they kind of look like this. But did they really? Let me ask you, what's the first thing that pops into your head when I say dinosaurs? For many of us, it's a massive, scaly reptilian beast, maybe stomping around on two legs and roaring ferociously. The idea of these colossal monsters has been seared into our brains thanks to decades of movies about them, particularly those made by a certain Mr. Michael Crichton and Universal Pictures. But what if I told you that the most famous image of dinosaurs is wrong, like totally wrong? What if the dinosaurs didn't look anything like this at all? Well, it turns out that they might not. In fact, evidence from the last few decades suggests that some of them looked more like this. That's right, some dinosaurs may have had feathers. Now, you may be thinking, wait a second, didn't dinosaurs evolve from reptiles? Didn't they just look like giant lizards? So why would they grow feathers like a bird does? You bring up an excellent point. And to understand how we got from scaly reptiles to feathered theropods, we need to talk about where the idea of dinosaurs having feathers came from in the first place. The truth is that for a long time, people thought dinosaurs were scaly because, well, that's just what they looked like. Fossils preserved the shape and texture of the skin around dinosaurs' bodies, which was smooth and scaled just like a lizard. Okay, so then why on earth would anyone think they had feathers? Well, one reason is that birds are dinosaurs. Yep, modern birds are the direct descendants of a group of meat-eating theropod dinosaurs called Coelurosaurs. These include some pretty famous dinosaurs like Velociraptor and Tyrannosaurus rex. This means that birds still have all the same bones as their dinosaur ancestors, just modified over time. They also share a lot of other features, like a hole in their hip sockets. Basically, birds are just dinosaurs that happen to be alive today. If we look at fossils of early ancestors of birds, we can see that they started to get feathers before they split off from the larger theropod group. But the thing is, the oldest known feathered dinosaur fossils come from animals that are still technically classified as theropods, like Archaeopteryx. This tells us that feathers evolved somewhere on the theropod branch of the dinosaur family tree, but exactly where has been a mystery. And it's not surprising that scientists wanted to solve this mystery. I mean, aside from being awesome, feathers are an amazing adaptation. They allow animals to stay warm, attract mates, hide from predators, fly, and they even help with frightening potential prey. If we could figure out when feathers appeared and which dinosaurs had them, it could tell us why they became so common in the animal kingdom. It would also tell us whether feathered dinosaurs were the exception or the rule. This brings us back to the beginning of the video and that famous image of dinosaurs as scaly monsters. If birds are dinosaurs and some birds are feathered, then clearly not all dinosaurs were scaly. So the image we've all grown up with of a dinosaur is simply incorrect. But it gets more complicated than that. See, while birds are dinosaurs, they're not the only ones. There are hundreds of other species in the Dinosauria group. And to date, none of them have been found with any sort of fuzz, scales, or feathers. Now, obviously, the lack of preserved skin and feathers in the fossil record doesn't mean that they definitely weren't feathered, but it does make it seem unlikely. So if feathers evolved somewhere on the theropod branch of the dinosaur family tree, but didn't show up in any of the other groups, then that means they must have evolved multiple times independently, and that makes no sense. Evolution doesn't work that way. Genetic changes don't just pop up out of nowhere. So if there was a genetic change that caused some dinosaurs to grow feathers, you'd expect that change to spread through the entire group. The answer, it seems, lies somewhere in between these two extremes. Either all dinosaurs had feathers at some point, or none of them did. It's just that simple. Okay, so how did scientists try to untangle this mess? Well, one approach is to try and find the oldest possible feathered dinosaur. Maybe if they could pinpoint when feathers first appeared, they could figure out which branch of the dinosaur family tree needed to be feathered. And finding older feathered dinosaurs would tell us that all dinosaurs had feathers at some point. In 2010, a team of researchers described a new species of feathered dinosaur called Sinosauropteryx. And based on its age, they argued that it was the earliest relative of birds ever discovered. After studying its fossil, which was found in China, they estimated that this dinosaur lived around 230 million years ago during the late Triassic period. At the time, this was significant because it was around 10 million years earlier than Archaeopteryx. However, in 2013, another team came along and said that the age estimate was way off, and that the dinosaur was probably from the early Jurassic period instead, around 200 million years ago. This wouldn't have changed the fact that Sino was the earliest known relative of birds, but it would have pushed back the appearance of feathers until the Jurassic, which would have meant that they evolved independently in the Theropod and Sauropod groups. But in 2019, yet another study came along and once again pushed back the age of Sinosauropteryx. Its fossil turned out to be 240 million years old, making it older than Archaeopteryx and pushing the origin of feathers back into the late Triassic. This evidence seems to indicate that feathers evolved only once in dinosaurs, meaning that all dinosaurs likely had feathers at some point in their evolutionary history. But there's still one big problem. We haven't found a single feathered dinosaur from the sauropod group. Even if we believe the latest age estimate for Sino, it would appear that feathers disappeared from the sauropods sometime after it split off from the theropods. So let's go back to the beginning. Maybe the reason we think dinosaurs are scaly is because we haven't found enough of them with feathers to realize that they were actually fluffy. Or maybe we haven't explored enough of the fossil record to push the emergence of feathers back far enough. Or maybe, just maybe, all of the dinosaurs that we've been looking at are actually birds, and they're the exceptions rather than the rule. That last part is highly unlikely. But if it were true, then birds would be the only dinosaurs left with feathers. So why don't they look more like their cousins, the crocodilians? Well, it turns out that we may already have the answer to that. There's a cool piece of technology that allows us to compare the proteins in different organisms to each other. When we use this technique to compare birds to crocodiles, we find that they're actually more closely related to each other than either are to alligators. This means that birds and crocodilians share a recent common ancestor, meaning that they diverged from each other somewhere around 240 million years ago. At the time, these animals were mostly small proto-alligators and proto-birds, but eventually, over millions of years, they grew bigger. And while crocodilians became the apex predators of their environments, birds got smaller again and adapted to life in the trees. When they returned to the skies, they took on a whole host of new adaptations like feathers. Over time, crocodilians remained largely unchanged. They were already perfectly suited to their niches, so why bother evolving? Birds continued to evolve, however, and eventually gave rise to all the species we see today. Feathers might have initially evolved to help dinosaurs keep warm, but they've taken on a whole host of new functions since then. The flight feathers on a bird's wings, for example, aren't used for warmth at all, but instead are used to catch air and allow the bird to fly. This means that feathers have become unrecognizable since they first appeared on dinosaurs. So maybe the reason we haven't found feathered sauropods is that they evolved beyond feathers. Maybe they had thick, downy feathers like a baby bird, or maybe they had stiff, strong feathers that are now gone. Maybe we haven't found a sauropod with feathers because feathers don't preserve, or because they were used for something else entirely. Basically, there are a lot of possibilities, but one thing is clear: the traditional image of dinosaurs as scaly monsters is wrong. Thanks for watching this episode of SCI Show, and thanks especially to our supporters who made it possible.